533 million. Just let that staggering number sink in for a second. That is exactly how many Facebook users had their personal data exposed in a massive 2021 breach. We're talking phone numbers, full names, locations, birth dates, all completely scraped by hackers just because of one vulnerability. If you have ever found yourself wondering why data privacy laws actually matter, well, a number that massive really sets the ultimate stakes.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, our goal is to completely demystify the incredibly complex web of U.S. data breach laws. Because here's the thing, there isn't just one single overarching federal data breach law in the U.S. Instead, companies have to navigate this wild patchwork of 50 totally different state laws. We're going to make sense of this today by comparing the baseline, what most states generally do, against the really strict outliers like California that completely changed the whole game.
So here is our quick roadmap for today. First, anatomy of a breach. Second, defining personal information. Third, triggering the alarm. Fourth, the California outlier. And finally, beyond notice.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Anatomy of a Breach.
Look, data breaches are a completely universal threat at this point. When companies collect and process massive amounts of personal data, they are essentially painting a giant target on their own backs. Whether it's that massive 2021 Facebook breach exposing millions of everyday users, or the really sophisticated SolarWinds hack that breached up to 18,000 customers, or even ransomware attacks hitting local healthcare providers, bad actors are constantly hunting for vulnerabilities. And the moment they find them, intense legal scrutiny immediately follows.
Moving right along to Section 2, Defining Personal Information.
Okay, before a company even worries about sending out breach notifications, they have to answer a fundamental question. What actually counts as personal information? The universal baseline across almost every state is basically a standard package. It starts with your first name or your first initial and your last name. But a name alone isn't enough to trigger anything. It's kind of like a puzzle. That name has to be combined with a sensitive identifier, something like your social security number, your driver's license, or a financial account number with a password. For example, if a hacker grabs your name and your credit card number together, every single state agrees. The alarm sounds. But the legal landscape is shifting fast. Roughly 2/3 of states are what we call outliers, meaning they've dramatically expanded this definition. Personal information isn't just financial stuff anymore. In these states, it now includes your medical history, unique biometric data, tax forms, and literally even your mother's maiden name. So to put that into perspective, while a stolen fingerprint might not legally trigger a breach in a baseline state, in an outlier state, it absolutely does.
Which brings us to Section 3, Triggering the Notification Alarm.
So when exactly does a company actually have to tell you that they've been hacked? Well, for nearly all states, the trigger hinges on a risk of harm analysis. Basically, they ask, is it reasonably likely that this breach is going to cause identity theft or fraud? Let's say an employee leaves a heavily encrypted company laptop on a train. If the thief can't access the data without the encryption key, there's no real risk of harm, so no legal notice is required. But outlier states like California, Texas, and Illinois, they use an absolute trigger. No risk analysis allowed at all. If unauthorized access happens, the alarm sounds immediately, even if that data was perfectly encrypted. And once that alarm sounds, the clock starts ticking, fast. Most state laws use this wonderfully vague language like, as expeditiously as possible and without unreasonable delay, right? But in the real world, that vague language usually sharpens into a hard maximum limit of 45 days for a lot of states. If you're a company operating nationally, the accepted industry best practice is to notify all affected parties within 30 days. And this slide brilliantly illustrates just how stressful multi-state compliance can be. We have some extreme outliers regarding deadlines. Vermont forces companies to notify the state attorney general within just 14 business days. Minnesota goes even further than that, requiring companies to notify national credit reporting agencies within a blistering 48 hours. I mean, just imagine discovering a massive cyber attack on your servers and having exactly 2 days to report it. It's intense. Now, when that notification letter finally hits your physical mailbox, what does it legally have to say? About half the states mandate specific must-haves in that consumer letter. These bullet points are essentially the standard across the board. A general description of what actually happened, exactly what type of your info was exposed, what steps the company is taking to protect you now, how to contact them directly, and helpful resources for reaching the FTC and credit agencies. But, of course, there's always a regulatory curveball. And Massachusetts is a genuinely fascinating outlier here.
While almost every other state actively requires a company to describe the incident, Massachusetts strictly prohibits including a description of the nature of the breach in the letter. You literally cannot tell the consumer how the hack happened. It turns drafting just one single nationwide notification letter into this hilarious, totally contradictory puzzle for corporate compliance teams.
That perfectly sets up Section 4, the California outlier. California's approach to data privacy has fundamentally changed the financial game for everybody. Just think about this. What happens when you don't actually have to prove you were harmed by a data breach in order to sue the company? Historically, if you wanted to sue a business for losing your data, you had to prove actual damages, meaning you had to show the judge the exact dollar amount you lost directly because of the breach. And honestly, that is incredibly hard to do. But under the California Consumer Privacy Act, the CCPA, California introduced this very specific number. Consumers can now recover statutory damages of anywhere between $100 and $750 per incident. You literally don't need to prove you lost a single cent. If a company's poor security practices led to your personal information getting breached, you can sue for this set amount. Now just multiply $750 by millions of users, and you can instantly see how class action financial risk just absolutely skyrocketed for these businesses. There is one really crucial caveat here, though. Consumers actually have to give businesses 30 days to cure the violation before they can pursue those massive statutory damages. But here's the catch. If the violation was that you had terrible cybersecurity and the hacker already stole the data, well, you can't exactly cure that after the fact. The data's gone. The damage is pretty much already done.
All right, Section 5, Beyond Notice, Security Laws. Reacting to a breach is one thing, right? But what are states doing to prevent them from happening in the first place? Well, about 2/3 of states now legally require companies to take proactive data security measures. But again, we have our baseline and we have our outliers. A lot of states, including California, just mandate what they call reasonable security. It's a bit vague, kind of depends on the size of the business. But contrast that with Massachusetts, which uses prescriptive security. Massachusetts literally writes the IT manual into the state law, legally mandating specific technical safeguards like user authentication, access controls, encryption, and active firewall protection.
And a brand new trend we're seeing pop up is the introduction of safe harbor laws. States like Connecticut, Iowa, Ohio, and Utah are trying to use a carrot instead of a stick. They actually offer companies a legal defense against these massive breach lawsuits, provided the company can prove they proactively adopted recognized, rigorous cybersecurity frameworks before the breach ever happened. It is a massive legal incentive to level up your security today. And we absolutely can't forget the end of the line, data destruction laws. These are enacted by about 2/3 of states now, and they essentially enforce data minimization. The underlying logic is brilliantly simple. You cannot lose data in a breach if you literally just don't have it anymore. These laws force companies to securely destroy or dispose of personal information so it's completely unreadable the second it is no longer needed. Okay, let's pull all of this together into the complete data lifecycle a company has to navigate across all 50 states. It starts with implementing reasonable or prescriptive security. If a breach happens anyway, they have to quickly analyze the incident and the risk of harm to see if it even triggers the notification alarm. If it does, they are suddenly in a dead sprint against strict 30 to 45-day notification timelines, dodging bizarre outlier rules from states like Massachusetts along the way. And finally, ensuring the secure destruction of any data they no longer need to hold. We're going to end on this provocative question today. A lot of privacy observers out there suggest the US is falling behind Europe because we just lack a single, comprehensive federal privacy law. But as we've seen throughout this whole explainer, navigating this intense, high-stakes patchwork of 50 completely different state laws with their massive financial penalties and wildly varying strict requirements might actually be forcing American companies to adopt much more rigorous information security programs than they would if there was just one basic federal standard. Is all this chaos actually making our data safer? It's definitely something to think about. Thank you so much for joining this explainer. And hey, keep asking the right questions about your data.